Crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with a card featuring Newton's Nook designs. When Newton's Nook released their September sets, there was this new Falling For You stamp set, and I think the saying's really fun. It says, "Every year I fall for autumn leaves, apple cider, hayride, pumpkin spice, and you." And as someone who really enjoys the fall season, it's a great sentiment, but it really only works for basically love cards, and I wanted to find a way to make it work outside of that. And so when I did my release card, I changed up the sentiment a little bit, and I wanted to show you today how you can do that. So even though it says "every year I fall for," I'm going to mask off that piece and change it up a bit in order to make it work for some other sentiments, other occasions. So I used "thankful for" in my release card, but today I'm going to be using the "cheers to." So cheers to autumn leaves, apple cider, hayrides, pumpkin spice, and you. And so I figured that had a little bit more of a wide use. So what I'm doing here is setting everything up on my MISTI. You could do the same thing on a stamp block, but I just wanted to make sure I got a great impression because I am working on watercolor paper. So I placed the sentiment down. Then I took a piece of Post-it note tape and covered the part of the sentiment that I didn't want, inked it up with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink because I am going to be clear embossing it, and doing some resist. And with the MISTI, you are able to stamp twice in the same place, and because, as I said, I'm working with watercolor paper, I don't always get a great impression the first time, so I like that option of being able to stamp twice because there's a little bit of tooth to the paper. It's not perfectly even and flat. And so I stamped it down twice with the VersaFine ink, and I did treat my paper with an embossing static powder bag to make sure that the embossing powder only stuck where I wanted it. And I'm going to put some clear embossing powder over the black, and that's going to make it look like black embossing, but it's a little bit easier to work with than black embossing powder. And then I'm going to heat set that part of the sentiment before I move on, because I don't want to knock off any of the embossing powder moving forward, and I also don't want to smear any of the ink. Generally, it's a good idea to wait for your heat gun to heat up before you bring it to the paper, because otherwise you might get some warping. So the other alternatives I find, so if if your paper's warping a little bit, heating both sides sometimes helps, like heating a little bit on the front and then on the back. And also I find that even if it is warped, if you use a generous amount of strong adhesive, you can usually get it to lie flat in the end. Or if you're not in a rush with your project, you can let it sit out for a while or put it in a heavy book and let it flatten out. But now I'm here ready to add the cheers to part of the sentiment. So I'm using the Years of Cheers stamp set, also by Newton's Nook. And this is one of those stamp sets that's perfect when you have an anniversary or like New Year's, because you can spell out. You use numerals to write, 20th anniversary or 2016. And so you have those number stamps in there, which are a great option. But in this instance, I'm just using the cheers, and I'm going to stamp the cheers and the two at the same time because I'm using my MISTI, so I know that they'll line up perfectly. If I was using a stamp block, I might just stamp them separately to get my placement a little bit easier. But I'm just kind of offsetting it from the autumn leaves sentiment because I just kind of like the way that looked, and it didn't match up perfectly with the block. So that way, if I put it off to the center, it wouldn't matter if I was a little bit off. I also stamped the coffee cup and a little bit of steam from the Falling For You stamp set, and I clear embossed that as well. Now I'm ready to add some color, and because I embossed it, it's going to resist any watercolor ink that I put on top of it. So right here, I have a cheap paintbrush, and all I'm doing is adding some water in the area over the sentiment. I'm not going perfectly over the sentiment, but I want to control where the color is going to go. So even though I'm using Color Burst, which generally kind of go all over the place, if you just add the water where you want it to go, it will stay within the confines of the water because it's water reactive. And I'm going to take advantage of that property, and if any of the powder gets where there isn't water, as long as I don't wet it, I will be able to wipe away that powder at the end. So I did find that sometimes the color wasn't moving as much as I wanted it to, and so in that instance I dipped my paintbrush back into the water and added a little bit more water to make it spread. But generally I'm not going to try to do too much painting or add too much more water, because I really do want to keep it concentrated in getting that unique look of color burst, where the colors kind of mix together on their own and they stay unique rather than just straight on painting watercolor. I want to make it look like I used color burst and get a unique effect. And so here, as I'm adding the water, what I'm trying to do is, rather than make like big sweeping brush strokes, instead I'm just sort of like dabbing it on so that the color burst will react a little bit more naturally. But I do need all of the color to go in between the letters and, like, you know, the open part of the D or the E, etc., so that you can read the sentiment. And once I have all of that, I want to make sure that it doesn't spread outside the bounds. If you get it too wet, it will start doing that. I want to really keep it contained. And so I'm brushing off any of the color burst that's still on the dry part of the paper with a dry paintbrush. Please don't bring your wet paintbrush to the paper to brush it off, because then of course it will just react and you'll have streaks. If you wanted to really keep it in that area, you cannot add any extra water. You have to kind of lay it all down to begin with. And so I, in this instance, was patient, and I'm going to put this aside to dry. But first I wanted to add just a little bit of splatter to the background to kind of go with that look. And so I am taking a glimmer mist from Tattered Angels, and I'm holding it really high above the paper, because if I hold it too close to the paper, the spray is going to push the color burst and push the water around, and I don't want that. I really want those to have those hard watercolor edges. So I held it about like 2 feet above the work surface. I spritzed it, and then I used lots of patience and just put it to the side and let it dry, air dry, no heat gun, because I don't want to reactivate that embossing powder. Instead, I just wanted to get a really natural look. And once I had all of that finished, I added a generous amount of adhesive, because there was a little bit of warping from all the extra medium that I added to it. And I rounded the corners with a We Are Memory Keepers corner chomper, which goes through any kind of surface. And I added the little coffee cup, which I'd colored with Copics. I've talked a lot about coloring coffee cups with Copics, so I just kind of skipped over that part for you today. But that is it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will leave you links in the video description below to all the products that I used and to the Nook Designs blog, where you can check out more details. Thanks for watching. Bye.